The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban neighborhood where Michael Harper lived. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock in the living room. It had been 5 years since Daniel, his eldest son, passed away in a tragic car accident. The memory of that day still lingered like an open wound, refusing to heal. Michael sat alone on the couch, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one Daniel used to sit in every evening. He could almost hear his son's laughter echoing through the room, but when he blinked, the sound vanished, leaving behind only the heavy weight of reality. Michael wasn't the same man he used to be before Daniel's death. Grief had carved deep lines into his face and stolen the spark from his eyes. Once a cheerful and outgoing person, he now spent most of his days locked away in his thoughts, replaying moments from the past over and over again. His wife Sarah tried her best to keep things together, but even she couldn't mask the sadness that clung to their home like a second skin. Their youngest son Ethan had grown quieter too, retreating into his own world as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance of emotions in the household. Every year on Daniel's birthday, the family visited his grave to pay their respects. They brought flowers, shared stories, and shed tears, all part of the ritual they had created to honor his memory. But this year felt different. As the date approached, Michael noticed something strange happening inside him. A restlessness began to gnaw at his mind, growing stronger with each passing day. It started with small things, a fleeting image of Daniel smiling at him during dinner or the sensation of being watched when he walked by Daniel's old bedroom. At first, he dismissed these feelings as mere tricks of the mind, products of his grief resurfacing after all these years. But then came the dreams. Night after night, Michael found himself trapped in the same haunting vision. In the dream, he stood beside Daniel's coffin, surrounded by darkness. From within the casket, he heard a faint voice calling out to him. Soft, desperate, pleading. "Dad, help me." Each time he woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. The voice sounded so real, so unmistakably Daniel's, that it left him shaken long after the nightmare ended. Was his mind playing cruel tricks on him, or was there more to these visions than met the eye? One evening, unable to shake off the unease, Michael decided to visit Daniel's grave alone. He drove to the cemetery under the cover of twilight, parking his car near the iron gates. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the earthy aroma of damp soil. Walking between rows of headstones, he finally reached the familiar plot marked by a simple marble slab engraved with Daniel's name. Michael knelt down, running his fingers over the cold surface as if hoping to find some trace of warmth. For a moment, he allowed himself to cry, letting the tears flow freely without restraint. But as he wiped his face and prepared to leave, something caught his attention. A tiny crack ran along the edge of the gravestone, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. Michael frowned, tilting his head slightly to examine it. Then his gaze shifted to the ground beneath his feet. The earth around the base of the stone appeared uneven, as though someone or something had disturbed it recently. His stomach tightened with unease. Had animals dug here? Or was it something else entirely? That night, sleep eluded him once, again. Lying awake in bed, Michael replayed the scene in his mind. Something about the cracked gravestone and the disturbed soil refused to let him rest. What if the coffin wasn't empty because of decay or time? What if there was no body inside at all? The thought sent a chill down his spine, yet it wouldn't leave him alone. By morning, he had made up his mind. No matter how irrational or terrifying it seemed, he needed answers. And the only way to get them was to open Daniel's coffin. The idea terrified him. Opening a loved one's grave went against everything he believed in. Yet the compulsion was overwhelming. He convinced himself that it wasn't morbid curiosity driving him. It was love. Love for Daniel, who deserved the truth, whatever it might be. If there was even the slightest chance that something was amiss, Michael owed it to his son to uncover it. For days he planned meticulously, waiting until the opportune moment when no one would suspect what he intended to do. Finally, under the cover of darkness, he grabbed a crowbar from the garage and slipped out of the house. The drive to the cemetery felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. When he arrived, the place was eerily silent, bathed in the pale glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. With trembling hands, Michael pried open the coffin lid, bracing himself for what he might find. Every fiber of his being screamed to stop, to turn back and forget this madness. Yet he pressed on, driven by a force stronger than fear. As the lid creaked open, revealing its contents, Michael froze. His breath hitched in his throat, and his heart skipped a beat. The coffin was empty. There was no body, no remains, just a neatly folded blanket lying where Daniel should have been. Time seemed to stand still as Michael processed what he saw. His mind raced, grappling with the implications of this discovery. How could this be possible? Where was Daniel? Questions swirled in his head, each one more unsettling than the last. Slowly, he closed the coffin and replaced the lid, his movements mechanical and numb. On the drive home, he couldn't focus on anything except the gaping hole in his understanding. Who had lied to him? Why had they done it? And most importantly, where was his son? When Michael walked through the front door, Sarah was sitting in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea. She looked up at him, startled by the haunted expression on his face. Before she could ask what was wrong, Michael blurted out, "Daniel's coffin is empty." Silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. Sarah's teacup clattered onto the table as her hands shook uncontrollably. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she whispered, "I've always wondered." Her words trailed off, but they were enough to confirm Michael's worst fears. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act, hidden from him for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend. And so Michael's journey to uncover the truth began. Not just about Daniel's disappearance, but about the people closest to him and the secrets they had kept buried for far too long. The night was eerily quiet as Michael stood over the open grave, staring into the empty coffin. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. How could this be possible? Where was Daniel's body? And why had no one noticed, or cared to, question this glaring inconsistency before now? The weight of what he had uncovered pressed down on him like a physical force, making it hard to breathe. He felt anger bubbling beneath the surface, but it was tempered by confusion and fear. Fear of what this might mean for his family. Fear of what he might uncover next. Carefully, Michael replaced the lid of the coffin and covered it back up with dirt, trying to make it look undisturbed. He knew he couldn't leave any evidence that he'd been there. If someone discovered what he'd done, they might try to stop him from digging deeper. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Who exactly would want to stop him? Was it just paranoia creeping in, or was there truly something sinister at play here? On the drive home, Michael replayed every detail of the past 5 years in his mind. He remembered the phone call that shattered their lives, the police officer informing them that Daniel had died in a car crash late one rainy night. He remembered seeing the mangled wreckage of the car, its metal frame twisted beyond recognition. But he also remembered how quickly everything was handled afterward. The authorities assured them that identifying the body wasn't necessary because the accident was so severe. "It's clear it was Daniel," they said. "There's no doubt." At the time, overwhelmed by grief, neither Michael nor Sarah questioned it. They trusted the system, trusted the people who were supposed to help them through this unimaginable tragedy. But now, standing face to face with an empty coffin, Michael realized how easily they had accepted those assurances without demanding proof. Why hadn't they insisted on seeing the remains? Why hadn't anyone asked more questions? These thoughts gnawed at him relentlessly, keeping him awake long after he returned home. When Michael walked through the front door, Sarah was sitting in the dimly lit kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She looked up when she heard him enter, startled by the haunted expression etched across his face. Her eyes widened as she took in his disheveled appearance, the dirt smudged on his clothes, the exhaustion in his posture. Before she could say anything, Michael blurted out, "Daniel's coffin is empty." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Sarah froze, her teacup trembling in her grasp. Slowly, she set it down on the table, her movements deliberate but shaky. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. "I've always wondered," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air between them. "What do you mean?" "You've always wondered?" Michael demanded, his tone sharp with frustration. "Wondered about what?" Sarah hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. Finally, she sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging under the weight of whatever burden she'd been carrying all these years. "That night, when we got the call about Daniel, I don't know, Michael. Something didn't feel right. It was too quick, too final. They didn't give us any details, just told us it was him and that there was nothing left to identify. I wanted to ask more, but you were so broken, and I didn't know how to bring it up. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid because of the grief." Her confession hit Michael like a punch to the gut. All this time, Sarah had harbored doubts too, but she had stayed silent, just like everyone else. He felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the situation, at the lies that had been allowed to fester unchecked for years. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice strained. "I was scared," Sarah admitted, her tears flowing freely now. "Scared of what it might mean, scared of losing you if we started questioning things. I thought it would tear us apart." Michael sank into a chair opposite her, his head in his hands. For a while, neither of them spoke. The enormity of what they were facing settled over them like a thick fog, obscuring everything else. If Daniel wasn't in the coffin, then where was he? Had he somehow survived the crash and disappeared? Or was there another explanation altogether? The next morning, Michael woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't let this go unanswered. Whatever the truth was, he needed to find it, not just for himself, but for Sarah, for Ethan, and most importantly, for Daniel. He began by revisiting old memories, piecing together fragments of information that had once seemed insignificant, but now took on new meaning. He remembered how Daniel had changed in the months leading up to his supposed death. Once outgoing and full of life, Daniel had become withdrawn and distant, spending more time alone in his room than with the family. Michael had chalked it up to teenage moodiness, but now he wondered if there had been something deeper going on. Had Daniel been planning to leave? Was the car crash merely a cover for his disappearance? To get answers, Michael decided to dig into the official records surrounding the accident. He visited the local police station, requesting access to the case file. The officer behind the desk gave him a wary look, but eventually handed over a thin folder containing sparse details about the incident. As Michael flipped through the pages, he noticed inconsistencies that raised red flags. Witnesses claimed they saw only one vehicle involved in the crash, yet the report vaguely mentioned multiple factors contributing to the collision. There were no photos of the scene, no diagrams, and no mention of whether Daniel's body had actually been recovered. Frustrated but undeterred, Michael pressed further, asking to speak with the officer who had handled the case. The man, Detective Harris, was nearing retirement and seemed reluctant to revisit old wounds. When Michael confronted him about the lack of evidence regarding Daniel's remains, Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, Mr. Harper," he said finally, "it was a messy situation. We did our best with the information we had at the time. Sometimes closure isn't pretty." His evasive response only fueled Michael's determination. Over the next few days, he reached out to friends and acquaintances who might have known anything that could shed light on what really happened. Some avoided his calls, while others offered vague condolences without addressing his questions directly. It was as though an invisible wall had been erected around the subject, preventing anyone from speaking openly about it. One person who did agree to meet with him was Mrs. Thompson, a neighbor who had been close to Daniel during his childhood. She invited Michael over for coffee, her expression somber as she listened to his concerns. "I never liked talking about it," she confessed after a long pause. "But yes, I did think it was strange how quickly everything was wrapped up. Daniel was such a vibrant boy, and then suddenly, poof, gone. No funeral, no viewing, nothing. Just a closed casket and a headstone. It didn't sit right with me. Her words confirmed what Michael already suspected. There was more to this story than anyone had been willing to admit. Determined to keep pushing forward, he turned his attention to Daniel's belongings, hoping to find some clue that might lead him closer to the truth. In the attic, he found boxes of old photographs, school projects, and personal items Daniel had left behind. Among them was a journal, its pages filled with scribbled notes and sketches. Flipping through it, Michael discovered entries that hinted at Daniel's growing dissatisfaction with his life. "I'm tired of feeling trapped," one entry read. "Maybe someday I'll find the courage to leave this place and start over somewhere new." Another page contained a hastily written plan, outlining steps for disappearing without a trace. Michael's heart sank as he realized that Daniel might have taken matters into his own hands. But if he had faked his death, why hadn't he reached out to his family since then? And why had no one stopped him? As Michael closed the journal, a nagging thought crept into his mind. What if Daniel hadn't acted alone? What if someone had helped him or forced him to vanish? The possibility opened up a Pandora's box of new questions, each more unsettling than the last. Whoever was involved, Michael vowed to uncover the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. Michael's investigation into Daniel's disappearance became an obsession. Every waking moment was consumed by the need to uncover the truth, and even his sleep was plagued by restless dreams of empty coffins and shadowy figures. He spent hours poring over old documents, retracing every step of the supposed accident, and questioning anyone who might have information, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. But the deeper he dug, the more tangled the web of lies appeared to. One evening, Michael sat at the kitchen table surrounded by piles of papers, photographs, and notes scrawled on scraps of paper. The journal he had found in the attic lay open in front of him, its pages filled with Daniel's thoughts and plans. As he flipped through it again, one particular entry caught his eye, an address written hastily in the corner of a page. It wasn't local. It was from a city several hundred miles away, a place Daniel had never mentioned visiting before. Michael stared at the scribbled words, his heart racing. Could this be a clue? A lead that would finally take him closer to understanding what really happened to his son. Determined to follow up on the discovery, Michael decided to visit the address. Before leaving, he confided in Ethan, hoping his youngest son might remember something about Daniel's connection to the location. At first, Ethan seemed reluctant to talk, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if weighing whether or not to share what he knew. Finally, after some coaxing, he admitted that Daniel had once mentioned wanting to start fresh somewhere far away. He said he felt stuck here, Ethan explained quietly, his voice tinged with guilt. Like nothing good could ever happen in this town. I thought he was just being dramatic. You know how teenagers are. But maybe he actually meant it. Ethan's revelation only strengthened Michael's resolve. Early the next morning, he packed a bag, grabbed his car keys, and set off for the distant city. The drive was long and uneventful, giving him plenty of time to think. His mind wandered back to Daniel's teenage years, the arguments, the silences, the moments when Michael had dismissed his son's struggles as typical adolescent rebellion. Now, those memories felt like missed opportunities, chances he'd had to connect with Daniel but squandered instead. The weight of regret pressed heavily on him, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for self-reflection later, if he survived this ordeal. When Michael arrived at the address, he was surprised to find himself standing in front of a modest apartment building tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The building looked ordinary enough, but something about it sent a shiver down his spine. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside and knocked on the door, corresponding to the unit number Daniel had written in his journal. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and disheveled hair. She blinked at him suspiciously, clearly startled by his unexpected visit. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Michael introduced himself, explaining that he was looking for information about someone who may have stayed there years ago. The woman frowned, shaking her head. "Sorry, I've only lived here for 2 years," she said. "But you can ask the landlord. He keeps records of past tenants." Grateful for the tip, Michael tracked down the landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson who ran the building from a cluttered office in the basement. When Michael showed him Daniel's name and described his appearance, Mr. Peterson's expression shifted slightly, though he tried to mask it. "Yeah, I remember him," the landlord admitted reluctantly. "Quiet kid, paid his rent on time, kept to himself, didn't cause any trouble." "Did he say why he came here?" Michael pressed, leaning forward intently. Mr. Peterson hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he muttered. "But yeah, he told me he needed a fresh start. Said he wanted to leave everything behind. His family, his friends, all of it, that's all I know." The answer left Michael with more questions than answers. Why had Daniel felt the need to cut ties so completely? And who else might have been involved in helping him disappear? Sensing that Mr. Peterson wasn't going to volunteer anything further, Michael thanked him and left, his mind swirling with possibilities. Back at the hotel where he was staying, Michael sifted through the new pieces of information he'd gathered. Something about the landlord's evasiveness nagged at him, as if there was more to the story that Mr. Peterson wasn't willing, or perhaps too afraid, to reveal. Determined to dig deeper, Michael began researching the area around the apartment building, looking for anything unusual that might tie back to Daniel. What he found chilled him to the bone. A quick online search turned up news articles about a string of mysterious disappearances in the city over the past decade. None of the cases had been solved, and while the victims varied in age and background, they shared one common thread. Each of them had reportedly faked their deaths before, vanishing without a trace. The pattern was eerie, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's situation might be connected to these other cases. The next day, Michael visited the local library, hoping to find archived records or newspaper clippings that might provide additional context. The librarian, a kind older woman named Mrs. Grayson, took pity on him and offered to help. Together, they uncovered a series of reports detailing strange occurrences linked to a shadowy organization rumored to assist people in disappearing permanently. According to the articles, the group operated under the radar, using forged identities, fake documentation, and covert networks to erase individuals from society entirely. Though no concrete evidence existed to prove the organization's existence, whispers of its activities persisted among certain circles. Some claimed it was a lifeline for those desperate to escape abusive relationships or dangerous situations. Others believed it was a sinister operation exploiting vulnerable people for profit. Either way, the implications were staggering. As Michael pieced together the fragments of information, a horrifying theory began to form in his mind. What if Daniel hadn't acted alone in staging his death? What if someone or something had orchestrated the entire event, manipulating him into disappearing? And if that was true, what did they stand to gain from it? His suspicions grew stronger when he encountered resistance from unexpected places. Back home, friends and acquaintances who had initially expressed sympathy for his plight suddenly became evasive or hostile when he probed too deeply. One former co-worker flatly refused to discuss the topic, warning Michael to let sleeping dogs lie. Even Sarah, though supportive of his efforts, urged caution, reminding him that pursuing the truth could put them all in danger. Despite the warnings, Michael pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and determination. He reached out to private investigators, journalists, and anyone else who might have insight into the shadowy world he was beginning to uncover. Slowly but surely, he assembled a network of allies who shared his goal of exposing the truth, not just for Daniel's sake, but for everyone affected by the same sinister forces. Among those allies was a retired detective named Frank Dawson, who specialized in cold cases involving missing persons. Frank listened intently as Michael recounted everything he had discovered so far, nodding gravely at certain points. "I've heard rumors about groups like this," Frank admitted. "They operate in the shadows, preying on people who feel trapped and desperate. If your son got mixed up with them, it's possible they coerced him into doing things he didn't want to do." The idea made Michael's blood run cold. Was it possible that Daniel hadn't willingly disappeared at all? Had he been forced into hiding against his will? The thought was almost too much to bear, but Michael knew he couldn't give up. Not until he had definitive answers. With Frank's help, Michael devised a plan to gather more evidence. They began monitoring social media accounts and online forums frequented by individuals seeking to vanish, looking for patterns or connections that might point to the organization's methods. Meanwhile, Michael continued revisiting old leads, following every thread no matter how thin it seemed. Each step brought him closer to unraveling the mystery, but also deeper into territory fraught with risk. One night, as Michael scrolled through files on his laptop, he stumbled upon a photograph, uploaded to an obscure website. In the background of the image, barely visible amidst a crowd of strangers, was a figure who bore an uncanny resemblance to Daniel. Though older and thinner, the man's features were unmistakable. Michael's hands trembled as he zoomed in on the photo, his pulse quickening. This was it, the break he had been waiting for. Tracing the location of the photo led him to a bustling street in the heart of the city. Armed with nothing but hope and sheer willpower, Michael returned to the city, determined to confront whoever or whatever was hiding behind the curtain of lies. Little did he know, this journey would force him to face not only the truth about Daniel's disappearance, but also the darkest corners of human nature. And so, Michael prepared for the final leg of his quest, knowing full well that the answers he sought might come at a price he wasn't ready to pay. The photograph Michael had discovered burned a hole in his mind. It was grainy and distant, but there was no mistaking the figure standing on the edge of the frame, older, thinner, and more worn than he remembered, but unmistakably Daniel. The image haunted him, both as a source of hope and a reminder of how much time had passed since his son vanished. For 5 long years, Michael had carried the weight of grief and unanswered questions. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was close to finding closure, or at least some semblance of it. The location in the photo wasn't difficult to pinpoint. A neon sign in the background identified the street as part of a busy downtown area, known for its crowded sidewalks and bustling cafes. Michael booked another trip to the city, this time with renewed determination. He packed lightly, bringing only essentials, including a copy of the photograph and notes detailing everything he had uncovered so far. As he drove toward the city, his thoughts swirled chaotically. Was Daniel alive? Had he chosen to stay hidden all these years? Or was he still trapped in a situation beyond his control? When Michael arrived, the energy of the city hit him like a wave. Horns blared, people hurried past, and the air buzzed with life. Yet beneath the surface noise, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lurked here. Something tied not just to Daniel's disappearance, but to the countless others who had vanished under similar circumstances. He walked along the street where the photo had been taken, scanning faces in the crowd, searching for any sign of familiarity. Each passing face felt like a potential lead, yet none matched the one etched into his memory. Finally, exhausted and disheartened, Michael stopped at a small diner tucked between 2 towering buildings. Its faded sign flickered above the entrance and the windows were smudged with grime, but the warm glow inside beckoned him. Perhaps it was instinct or sheer coincidence, but something about the place tugged at him. Pushing open the door, he stepped inside and slid into a booth near the window. A waitress approached, her name tag reading Linda. She smiled politely, asking if he wanted coffee or a menu. Michael nodded absently, ordering a cup of coffee while surreptitiously glancing around the room. His eyes landed on a man behind the counter, a wiry figure with graying hair and sharp cheekbones. Something about him struck a chord. There was a resemblance, subtle but undeniable. Could it be Daniel? Michael's heart raced as he studied the man from across the room. He looked older, weathered by time and hardship, but the shape of his jaw and the curve of his nose were eerily familiar. Swallowing hard, Michael signaled for Linda to come over again. "Who's the guy working behind the counter?" he asked casually, trying to keep his voice steady. "That's Mark," she replied, with a shrug. "He's been here for a couple of years, keeps to himself mostly." "Mark?" Michael repeated softly, letting the name roll off his tongue. It didn't fit Daniel, but then again, nothing about this scenario did. People could change their names, their appearances, even their entire identities if they had to. Resolving to find out more, Michael waited until the diner emptied slightly before approaching the counter. "Excuse me," he said, leaning closer to the man. "Do you have a minute?" The man glanced up, his expression guarded. "What can I do for you?" Michael hesitated, unsure how to proceed. He pulled out the photograph, pointing to the figure in the background. "I think I recognize someone in this picture," he began cautiously. "Does this look like anyone you know?" The man's eyes narrowed as he studied the image. For a split second, Michael thought he saw recognition flash across his face, but it disappeared almost instantly. "Nope, doesn't ring a bell," the man muttered, turning away dismissively. But Michael wasn't convinced. There was something in the man's demeanor, an unease, a flicker of fear that told him he was onto something. Determined not to let go, he pressed further. "Are you sure? Because I think it looks a lot like you." The man froze, his hands gripping the edge of the counter tightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. "You don't want to mess with this, mister. Just leave it alone." "I can't," Michael replied firmly. "This is my son we're talking about." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then slowly, the man exhaled, his shoulders sagging as if carrying an immense burden. "Okay," he whispered. "Follow me." He led Michael to a storage room at the back of the diner, closing the door firmly behind them. In the dim light, Michael could see the toll the years had taken on the man's face. Lines etched deeply into his skin, and his eyes carried a weariness that went beyond mere age. But despite the changes, there was no denying it. It was Daniel. "Dad." Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke, breaking the fragile tension in the room. Tears welled up in his eyes, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Michael stepped forward, pulling his son into a tight embrace. The floodgates opened, and both men cried openly, releasing years of pent-up emotion. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel wiped his face, visibly struggling to compose himself. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I never meant for things to turn out this way." Michael shook his head, overwhelmed but insistent. "We'll talk about that later. Right now I need to know what happened. Why did you fake your death? Who helped you?" Daniel hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door as if expecting someone to barge in. "It wasn't my idea," he admitted quietly. "There were people. They found me when I was at my lowest point. I was drowning, Dad. School, home, everything. It felt suffocating. I wanted out, but I didn't know how to make it happen. That's when they approached me. They promised me a way to start over, to escape everything. At first it sounded perfect, but once I agreed, I realized I'd made a deal with the devil." Michael listened intently, his stomach churning with dread. "What kind of deal?" "They gave me a new identity, money to get started, and instructions to sever all ties with my old life," Daniel explained. "In return, I had to work for them. Small jobs at first, deliveries, errands, but then it escalated. They used me, manipulated me into doing things I didn't want to do. Every time I tried to leave, they threatened to expose me, to ruin whatever chance I had at starting fresh. I was trapped." His words sent a chill through Michael. This wasn't just a case of a teenager running away. It was a calculated operation designed to exploit vulnerable individuals. The organization Frank Dawson had warned him about, it was real, and it had ensnared Daniel. "Why didn't you reach out?" Michael asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "We could have helped you." "I wanted to," Daniel confessed. "So many times I picked up the phone, but I couldn't risk it. Not just for me, but for you guys too. If they found out I contacted you, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone I cared about. I couldn't live with that." Tears streamed down Michael's face as he absorbed his son's confession. The pain of losing Daniel had been unbearable, but knowing that he had suffered alone, unable to seek help, cut deeper than anything else. Still, there was no time for self-pity. They needed a plan, a way to break free from the grip of the organization that had held Daniel captive for so long. "We'll figure this out together," Michael vowed. You're not alone anymore." As they sat in the cramped storage room, father and son began piecing together a strategy. Daniel shared details about the organization, describing key players and locations he had encountered during his time with them. Michael jotted down every word, knowing that this information could be the key to dismantling the network once and for all. But as they talked, a shadow loomed outside the diner's window. Unbeknownst to either of them, someone had been watching and waiting for this exact moment. The storage room of the diner felt suffocating as Michael and Daniel huddled together, their voices barely above a whisper. Every word they exchanged carried the weight of years of separation, pain, and unanswered questions. But beneath the fragile hope that had sparked between them lay an undeniable tension, a shared understanding that their reunion was far from safe. The organization Daniel spoke about wasn't just some distant threat. It was real, dangerous, and closer than either of them realized. As Daniel recounted more details about his life over the past 5 years, Michael scribbled notes furiously on a crumpled napkin, jotting down names, places, and descriptions of people who might be involved. In the shadowy operation, some were vague memories, fragments of conversations Daniel had overheard or fleeting glimpses of figures he'd seen during deliveries. Others were clearer, names like Victor and Claire, individuals Daniel described as enforcers within the group. They were ruthless, manipulative, and always watching. "They don't let anyone leave," Daniel said, his voice trembling with fear. "If you try to walk away, they make sure you regret it. Or worse." Michael clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. He wanted nothing more than to march out of the diner and confront these people head-on, but he knew better. Acting impulsively would only put both him and Daniel in greater danger. Instead, he forced himself to stay calm, focusing on formulating a plan to protect his son while dismantling the network that had held him captive for so long. "We need evidence," Michael said firmly. "Something concrete we can use to expose them, not just for your sake, but for everyone else they've hurt." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained grim. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad. But we have to be careful. If they find out I'm talking to you—" His words trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Neither of them needed to spell out what could happen if the organization discovered Daniel's betrayal. It was a risk they couldn't afford to take lightly. Over the next hour, father and son devised a strategy. Daniel agreed to gather any documents, photos, or other materials he still had access to, anything that could implicate the organization. Meanwhile, Michael would reach out to Frank Dawson, the retired detective who had been helping him investigate the case. Together, they would compile the evidence into a dossier strong enough to bring the entire operation crashing down. Before leaving the diner, Michael embraced Daniel tightly, promising to return soon. "Stay safe," he urged. "And don't trust anyone, not even Linda or the other staff here. You don't know who might be working for them." Daniel nodded solemnly. His eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, but it was fragile, easily shattered by one wrong move. Back at his hotel, Michael immediately called Frank, explaining everything that had transpired at the diner. The retired detective listened intently, his tone growing increasingly grave as Michael detailed the organization's tactics and the risks Daniel faced. When Michael finished speaking, Frank exhaled sharply. "This is bigger than I thought," Frank admitted. "These groups operate like predators, preying on vulnerable people and using them until there's nothing left. Exposing them won't be easy. They're smart, well-connected, and ruthless, but if we play our cards right, we might stand a chance." Frank suggested reaching out to a trusted journalist who specialized in investigative reporting. Her name was Rachel Nguyen, and she had a reputation for tackling high-stakes stories without backing down, no matter the danger. Michael hesitated. At first, bringing in another person meant expanding the circle of trust, which increased the risk of exposure. But Frank assured him that Rachel could be relied upon to keep things confidential until the story broke. Reluctantly, Michael agreed. He arranged a meeting with Rachel the following day, choosing a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of the city where they were less likely to be noticed. When Rachel arrived, she introduced herself with a firm handshake and an air of professionalism that immediately put Michael at ease. She listened carefully as he explained the situation, occasionally jotting down notes but mostly maintaining eye contact, her expression unreadable. When Michael finished, Rachel leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "This is explosive," she said finally. "If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, we're looking at something far bigger than a single missing person case. This could blow the lid off an entire underground network." "But can you help us?" Michael asked anxiously. "We need someone who can get this story out there before they silence us." Rachel nodded resolutely. "I'll do everything I can, but understand this. Once we start digging, there's no turning back. They'll come after us hard, and we'll need to stay 2 steps ahead at all times." With Rachel on board, the team began working tirelessly to piece together the evidence Daniel had promised to provide. Over the next few days, Michael returned to the diner multiple times, each visit fraught with tension. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Linda greeted him warmly, customers chatted idly, and Daniel served tables with practiced efficiency. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts proved correct when, on his 3rd visit, he noticed a man lingering near the entrance, his gaze fixed intently on Daniel. The man wore a dark jacket and sunglasses, despite the cloudy weather, and his posture screamed suspicion. Michael's heart raced as he discreetly pointed him out to Daniel. "Do you recognize him?" he whispered urgently. Daniel paled, his hands shaking slightly as he glanced toward the stranger. "That's Victor," he murmured. "One of their enforcers. What's he doing here?" Michael's mind raced. Had Victor somehow learned about their plans, or was this merely routine surveillance? Either way, his presence posed a direct threat to Daniel's safety. Without hesitation, Michael pulled Daniel aside, urging him to leave the diner immediately. "You need to go somewhere safe," Michael insisted. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Daniel hesitated, torn between fear and defiance. "I can't run again, Dad, not now, not when we're so close." "I'm not asking you to run," Michael replied firmly. "I'm asking you to survive, trust me. We'll finish this together." After much persuasion, Daniel reluctantly agreed to follow Michael's instructions. Using a burner phone, Michael contacted Frank, who arranged for a secure location where Daniel could lay low until the investigation reached its climax. As Daniel slipped out the back door of the diner, Michael stayed behind, keeping a watchful eye on Victor to ensure he didn't follow. Once Daniel was safely tucked away, Michael focused all his energy on gathering the remaining pieces of evidence. With Rachel's guidance, he cross-referenced the information Daniel had provided with public records, news articles, and anonymous tips submitted online. Slowly but surely, a damning picture emerged, one that implicated not only the organization's key players, but also several corrupt officials who had turned a blind eye to their activities in exchange for bribes or favors. But as the evidence mounted, so did the risks. One evening, as Michael reviewed the files in his hotel room, he heard a soft knock at the door. Cautiously, he approached, peering through the peephole. Standing in the hallway was a woman dressed in a tailored suit, her face calm but unreadable. Something about her demeanor set off alarm bells in Michael's mind. "Who is it?" he called out, keeping his voice steady. "My name is Claire," the woman replied smoothly. "We need to talk." Michael's blood ran cold. Claire, the same name Daniel had mentioned as one of the enforcers. How had she found him, and what did she want? Forcing himself to remain composed, Michael opened the door just wide enough to see her clearly. "What do you want?" he demanded. Claire smiled faintly, her expression devoid of warmth. "You've been causing quite a stir lately, Mr. Harper. Asking questions, poking around where you shouldn't. Let's just say my associates are concerned." "I don't care about your associates," Michael shot back, his voice laced with defiance. "You took my son, you lied to my family. Do you really think I'm going to stop until the world knows the truth?" Claire's smile faltered, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "Be careful what you wish for," she warned. "Sometimes the truth comes at a price." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. of the hallway. Michael closed the door, his heart pounding wildly. He knew then that they were running out of time. The organization wouldn't let them expose their secrets without a fight, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to protect themselves. Despite the mounting pressure, Michael refused to back down. With Rachel's help, he finalized the dossier, ensuring every detail was meticulously documented. Then, under the cover of darkness, they delivered copies to trusted contacts in law enforcement, media outlets, and advocacy groups. By morning, the story had broken wide open, sending shockwaves through the city and beyond. As authorities launched investigations and arrests began, Michael received a call from Daniel, who was finally safe. "It's over, Dad," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." But Michael knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing the wounds inflicted by years of lies and manipulation would take time. Still, as he hung up the phone, he allowed himself a moment of quiet, relief. The truth had come to light, and with it, the hope of a new beginning for his family. The breaking of the story sent shockwaves through the city, rippling outward until it reached national headlines. The exposé, meticulously crafted by Rachel Nguyen with input from Michael and Frank Dawson, painted a damning portrait of an underground network that had preyed on vulnerable individuals for years. Names, dates, locations, all were laid bare in painstaking detail, backed by irrefutable evidence gathered from Daniel's insider knowledge and corroborated by independent sources. Within hours of publication, law enforcement agencies launched coordinated raids targeting key figures within the organization. Arrests were made, properties seized, and long-buried secrets unearthed. For Michael Harper, watching the fallout unfold was surreal. What had started as a desperate quest to uncover the truth about his son's disappearance had grown into something far larger, a crusade to dismantle a system built on exploitation and deceit. As reports poured in about high-ranking officials implicated in corruption and enforcers like Victor and Claire being taken into custody, Michael felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, but also lingering anger at how easily such a monstrous operation had thrived unchecked for so long. Yet amidst the chaos, there was one question that weighed heavily on Michael's mind: what next? For 5 years, his life had revolved around finding answers, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that had consumed him entirely. Now that the truth was out, he faced a new challenge: rebuilding his family and reclaiming the life they had lost. Daniel remained in hiding during the initial wave of arrests, shielded by Frank Dawson's careful planning and an anonymous safe house miles away from the city. It wasn't until the dust began to settle that Michael brought him home, a moment fraught with both joy and apprehension. When Daniel walked through the front door, Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face as she rushed to embrace him. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief before he too joined in the hug, the 4 of them clinging to each other as if afraid to let go. But the reunion wasn't without its challenges. Years of separation had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Daniel struggled to adjust to life back home, haunted by guilt over the pain he had caused and fearful that remnants of the organization might still be lurking in the shadows. At night, he often woke up drenched in sweat, plagued by nightmares of Victor's cold stare or Claire's veiled threats. Michael and Sarah did their best to reassure him, reminding him daily that he was safe now, but healing would take time. Over the weeks that followed, the family worked hard to reconnect. They shared meals together, talked openly about their feelings, and slowly rebuilt the trust that had been shattered. Michael encouraged Daniel to write about his experiences, not just for himself, but as a way to help others who might find themselves trapped in similar situations. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed, pouring his thoughts onto paper in fits and starts. His words weren't polished, but they carried raw honesty, offering a glimpse into the psychological toll of living under constant fear. Meanwhile, the public reaction to the scandal continued to grow. The exposé sparked outrage across the country, prompting calls for systemic reforms and stricter oversight of institutions complicit in enabling such operations. Advocacy groups rallied around victims' families, demanding justice and accountability. Many praised Michael for his courage in pursuing the truth, while others criticized him for stirring up trouble that exposed the darker side of society. But Michael paid little attention to the noise. His focus remained firmly on his family, and ensuring that no one else would ever suffer as they had. One day, as Michael sat in the living room flipping through news articles about the investigation, Daniel approached him hesitantly. "Dad," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk?" Michael set the papers aside and gestured for Daniel to sit down. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Daniel took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting nervously. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about what I did or didn't do, and I need to say something." Michael nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead." "I'm sorry," Daniel blurted out, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry for leaving you, for making you think I was dead. I know I hurt you all more than I can ever make up for, but I want you to know, I never stopped loving you, not for a single second." Michael's throat tightened as he pulled Daniel into a tight embrace. "We love you too, son, more than you'll ever know. And we're going to get through this, together." As the days turned into weeks, the Harpers began to find a fragile sense of normalcy. They attended counseling sessions as a family, learning to navigate the complex emotions stirred up by Daniel's return. Sarah threw herself into volunteer work, helping organizations dedicated to supporting runaway teens and exploited individuals. Ethan, inspired by his brother's resilience, started speaking out at school about mental health awareness and the importance of reaching out when things feel overwhelming. Daniel, for his part, decided to channel his experiences into something positive. With Michael's encouragement, he submitted excerpts of his writing to local publications, hoping to raise awareness about the dangers of underground networks and the importance of seeking help early. To his surprise, his words resonated deeply with readers, earning praise for their authenticity and vulnerability. Slowly but surely, Daniel began to rebuild his confidence, rediscovering the vibrant, hopeful young man he had once been. Months later, the Harper family gathered around the year dining table for a quiet celebration. It wasn't anyone's birthday or anniversary. It was simply a reminder of how far they had come. Candles flickered softly, casting warm light across their faces as they shared stories and laughter. For the first time in years, the atmosphere felt light, unburdened by the weight of unanswered questions or unresolved grief. As dessert was served, Michael raised his glass. "To us," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To our family. We've been through hell and back, but we're still standing. Together." Everyone clinked their glasses, smiles spreading across their faces. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, they faced it with renewed strength and unity. The truth had been painful to uncover, but it had also set them free to heal, to grow, and to build a future rooted in love and honesty. Outside, the world continued to spin, indifferent to the struggles of those caught in its currents. But inside the Harper household, a quiet revolution had taken place. One born not of vengeance or bitterness, but of hope. Hope that even in the darkest moments, the light of truth could shine through and guide them toward redemption.